Now, I find it pretty easy to imagine that you'd be wondering whether you should be getting the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold5 this year that just came out recently. So I'm going to be addressing several key points on whether you should or you shouldn't. Okay, and it's based on certain things that I think a lot of people would typically use a phone like this for. So for something like watching movies, you have many screens for you to do so. So you got your 6.2-inch cover screen right here, which is a dynamic AMOLED 2X. It goes up to 120 Hz, just like the previous Fold, and when you unfold it, you get a 7.6-inch foldable dynamic AMOLED 2X, which also goes up to 120 Hz. The inner screen, you need to be kind of familiar with a 5.6 aspect ratio because it's really square. And as you can see, even if you look from the front here, you don't really see the crease, but it's just like last time where when you can see my light bar diffusing right in the middle. The crease is still pretty much there, so when you slant it this way, you can still definitely see it. Either way, I don't think it bothers me a lot because that's just what foldable tech is all about. Sooner or later, I'm pretty sure Samsung would change that and make those improvements. Either way, both displays support HDR10+ streaming with wide Vine L1 certification for HD Netflix streaming, which it totally is able to do. The two screens are very consistent with one another in terms of colors and even brightness. And you would honestly just think that these two panels were literally cut from the same cloth. You can change your refresh rates as well, which is here in motion smoothness between adaptive and standard. So adaptive will give you up to 120 Hz, which makes it adaptive between 10 to 120 Hz. And if you want to just stick flat to standard, which is 60 Hz, you can do so as well. But I would still pick adaptive because, you know, we're already on such advanced display tech, so might as well get the full experience. Overall display quality has always been Samsung's strength, so that level of confidence should remain here. The unfolded screen is really gorgeous, producing content vibrancy all across the board with plenty of definition and clarity. The experience, however, is not a jump from the Fold 4. So if you're hoping to have a better display experience on the Fold 5 as a Fold 4 owner, you'd just be jumping back to the same boat. I think the front screen is just okay. You can take care of lots of administrative tasks and look at some websites, so you can still get web optimized experiences here. But the one thing I still need to get used to is that keyboard. You see, because we're dealing with such a long but not so wide phone, the keyboard looks a little squashed up. So eventually you will succumb to unfolding it and continuing, which makes it a whole lot of difference. This is why One UI is one of the best operating systems when it comes to foldables, because of that level of optimization and how they know how people would use foldables, and because we all adopted earlier versions of the Z Fold, which has led to this, a much better operating system experience. So let's move forward. The Galaxy Z Fold5 employs the same triple camera system as the Z Fold4, and the first thing on the menu would be the 50 megapixel Samsung GN3 sensor, followed by a Samsung S5K 3K1 10 megapixel 3x telephoto shooter, and finally a Sony IMX258 12 megapixel ultra wide. As for selfies, there are two selfie cameras just like the other folds. There's a 10 megapixel selfie camera on the cover screen, and on the inner screen there is a hidden under display camera, which is just 4 megapixels, and you will always see it right here, but you can't see it here right now because it's hidden under the display, but it's right there. You will see it under more direct sunlight. This is exactly the Z Fold4's camera setup. Everything is still the same. And where is that improvement, you ask? Well, it's on the computational side of things, or AI if you will. This is using the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 made for Galaxy, and it has Snapdragon's cognitive ISP that enables real-time semantic segmentation to enhance images, ultra-low light video capture, and multi-frame noise reduction. So what I'm trying to say is the improvements are in software. It has a better camera in terms of software, but for hardware, it's exactly the same. What really matters is whether this takes good photos or not. The wide sensor likes to add saturation, which is a very typical Samsung thing to do, and general detail is well defined, while complexities like foliage and textures also get a boost in sharpness, but that's just the AI doing its job. And the good news is it's not overdone this time. After all, the improvements in camera for the Z Fold5 lie in the AI side of things, like I mentioned before. It may not be a dedicated camera phone just like the S23 Ultra, which I don't think this can beat, but it does still take good photos nonetheless. So now, the ultra wide, the 12 megapixel ultra wide has pretty natural colors. Shots have a reasonable level of sharpness that is up to the Galaxy par. Contrast is pretty high, and dynamic range just essentially works. If lighting is too bright, then it could get blown out, but that's kind of rare anyway, and you can just manually adjust the exposure. It's definitely not the best ultra-wide Samsung's ever produced, but it does its job. And you will like the distortion correction because Samsung is pretty good at that. The 12 megapixel telephoto sensor retains good detail up to a 5x zoom. Obviously, we still see a lot of noise in the surrounding corners, but it's fine because this is just the limitation of phones these days because of such a small sensor. You can enjoy some of that sweet long distance space zoom, but it's still not there yet. It's improved, but it's definitely not there yet. The improvements from the AI side here are very marginal. It can salvage more detail than ever, but you will still end up with pretty noisy shots with most textures looking painted on. I think the cover screen's 10 megapixel shooter for selfies does pretty okay. The detail is very decent, the colors are very nice and natural, and there's a lot of AI work, as you can see, that the sharpness might look a little bit uncanny, but it focuses on complementing your face rather than giving you a complete natural photo because maybe you don't like how you really look, so this kind of enhances it in a way. So that kind of wraps up the Z Fold5 as a camera system. I don't really honestly see the software side, you know, like groundbreakingly improving the photos compared to the Z Fold4, but I cannot say that this is a mediocre or a pretty poor camera system. I think as a foldable, a high-end foldable, it does pretty well if you want to just take regular photos, enjoy some ultra wides, and zoom in some buildings every now and then, just like I did. So if you're planning to use the Z Fold5 for playing games, I'd say it's pretty nice and ideal. And I'm playing a battle royale called Farlight 84, very resource hungry, very demanding. But as you can see, this Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy is still holding up. I am still getting up way above 100 FPS, even on the highest settings. And the temperature is slowly climbing towards 40s, and I think that's pretty normal. But of course, what's the real benefit here is the fact that you have such a wide screen here that you can take advantage of more well-spaced buttons and of course better field of view compared to a standard candy bar phone. And yeah, if you have a competitive edge over your opponents here, but the thing is, you know, I always regarded the Z Fold series to be for people in the corporate line of life, and you know, they're not necessarily gamers. But of course, that's not representing the entire audience profile. So I still think people would still buy a phone like this to play games every now and then. My favorite feature here is honestly the pause USB delivery function, which you can see in the game booster settings, is that when you plug in your phone to a USB cable, you will stop supplying a charge to your battery while you're playing games. And this is particularly bad for your phone because it's overheating when, you know, it's still trying to expend energy trying to play your games and you're still charging it back. So that's bad for your battery. So this one just supplies power straight to your phone and not charge your phone's battery so much. And this in the long run will make this phone last even longer, especially if you're a gamer trying to use a phone like this to play games. Obviously, when you get a phone like this, you want to be more involved with doing your work. You got all this screen space. How is the multi-window experience? Well, there are two facets to it. There are things such as the taskbar that pops up when you are on any other app other than the home screen. You can see the taskbar when you're on an app. This is the calculator app. But when you get back to the home screen, you won't see it. You can see from here, these are the apps that you can typically use that are the Samsung pre-built in, such as the Gallery and Samsung Notes. But there is a separator here that leads to other apps that you are currently using in the background. So you can see that I'm on a calculator now and I was on Game Booster earlier. So I just drag one app out and it will automatically split out. And as for other apps, you can still drag it out, still see one more there. And on, let's use the photo gallery to open up in the center. You can have up to 1, 2, 3, 4 open apps concurrently. And this is especially useful for people who want to have a glance of a lot of things at once. I could have my Facebook page lined up here and my website here, along with my Twitter and my Instagram, so that I could have a glance of everything while saving a lot of time and not going back to switching through apps like this. So this is one of the best multi-window experiences I've seen on an Android foldable. Definitely something that Samsung is very proud to do. So now with all this work, just how is the battery life? Well, it uses a 4400 milliamp battery, and typically if you're doing what I'm doing, such as multi-window work and playing some games, you will definitely get something like 4 to 5 hours of screen on time. And if you're trying to figure out like just how fast the charging is, you're gonna need one of these, the 25 watt Samsung charger that's not included in the package. It would take about an hour, 20 minutes to fully charge from 0 to 100, which I would still say is pretty slow, but I would still also say that it's one of the safest charging speeds ever, because everyone knows that if you're charging your phone really fast, the battery builds up a lot of heat, and that could lead to poor battery longevity in the long run. So this is overall a pretty high-end foldable that Samsung has made, but it's not a major improvement over the Z Fold 4. The Z Fold 5, especially in Malaysia, should be the only high-end foldable you should get if you've been wanting to try one. It simply trumps the available foldable competition in terms of software, hardware, and build quality. You can appreciate the speedy UFS 4.0 and the USB 3.2 here, which is also DeX compatible, which you will read in one of my many articles that I've talked about, and it can display your phone out to a monitor in that DeX mode, which is a constant work in progress if you ask me. One thing's for certain, Z Fold 4 users are still enjoying their 1-year-old foldable, and I'd tell them not to make the jump for this one. But if you're coming from the Fold 1, 2, and 3, it's a massive leap. You gotta take it, it's a no-brainer. Samsung's decision on refining over redefining is a sound decision, and it needed to get the smaller things right before the big stuff, which I anticipate should be next year. So hopefully we'll see things like faster charging and eventually removing this crease, which their competition has seriously already started doing. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this has helped you to get better insight towards the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 5, and I'll see you guys in the next video.